Today we are discussing what is consciousness, the stairway to consciousness. And the reason why that I wanted to talk about this particular topic today is because I have noticed that there are a lot of people who follow me that are involved with the spiritual community and follow spiritual gurus and things like this. And I want to put this information out there because there are a lot of traps in the spiritual community. Particularly, there's a lot of spiritual gurus out there who have no idea what consciousness is, yet try to say that they'll tell you how to reach a higher consciousness, when in fact the methods that they teach actually bring you further and further away from a higher consciousness. So it's extremely important to be able to understand what exactly consciousness is and how we can raise it, and especially what the difference is between consciousness with regard to concepts and percepts, the difference between consciousness and sentience, the difference between experience and knowledge. All these things play a critical role in understanding how to evolve, grow, and learn as eternal minds. And there are, like I said, there are traps littered all over the spiritual community that actually bring you further away from enlightenment, which is ironic, but it's true. So I wanted to talk about this so that I can get this information out there to you guys, so you'll be armed with this knowledge to be able to discern when someone is actually telling you something that's leading further away from your actualization. So we're going to begin this by reading from The Stairway to Consciousness by Dr. Thomas Stark. And as always, if you enjoyed this reading, you can support the author. The link will be in the description of this video. All right, so we are beginning The Stairway to Consciousness by Dr. Thomas Stark. The Birth. Imagine a zombie universe, a universe without consciousness. If consciousness were irrelevant to the operations of the universe, there would be no such thing as consciousness. After all, what would be the point? What sufficient reason could be offered for it? Nature doesn't generate anything that has no function. Yet consciousness, the most fundamental fact of our life that defines who we are and how we relate to the world, is, according to science, nothing but an accident, a product of random chance, a bizarre mutation, an epiphenomenon, an illusion, an emergent property. It serves no purpose, it has no causal efficacy. It is totally irrelevant to the workings of inert, lifeless, mindless atoms under the control of the inert, lifeless, mindless laws of physics. The ideology of materialism is deadly to the concept of consciousness. And this is something else that I want you guys to really recall and remember about materialist science. So the current scientific paradigm, most people think that, oh, science has most of the big ideas figured out. There's just some little things here and there that they haven't figured out yet. When nothing could be further from the truth. All the big questions in life, scientific materialism, the current scientific paradigm, has no idea how they could operate. For example, your consciousness and your subjectivity. Scientific materialism can say nothing about how that is possible. It's completely unknown how your sentience, your subjectivity, your consciousness could emerge. And that is really think about this, because so many people don't. But everything that you know is filtered through your subjectivity. Now that might seem obvious, but really think about that. You have never experienced anything apart from your subjectivity. Your subjectivity, our subjectivity, is fundamental. It's how we are able to, it's how all of our experiences are mediated. Yet science is completely silent as to how this could be possible. How this could how something such as your subjectivity, your sentience, could possibly emerge from lifeless, mindless, dead atoms. Completely unknown. A complete question mark at the heart of science. Science contains a fatal flaw. That's why it needs to be replaced. Materialist and empirical science must be replaced by idealist and rationalist science. That is ontological mathematics, the science of the future, the science of mind. Why would nature create illusions? How could it? Materialism requires nothing but an unthinking universe, enacting nothing but zombie processes. That, after all, is the essence of materialism. If there is nothing but lifeless, mindless matter, who needs life? Who needs mind? How can either come into existence in the first place? Who ordered that? It's logically impossible to extract life from lifelessness and mind from mindlessness. You can arrange lifeless and mindless in infinite ways. Not one will logically achieve the miracle of creating the emergent properties of life and mind. So that's the important thing to understand, that if atoms, material, is lifeless and mindless, which the current scientific paradigm claims, if they are lifeless and mindless, it's a logical impossibility for life and mind to emerge. This is why scientific empiricism is not rational. It's a faith in the senses, because it is a logical impossibility. It is a logical, rational, it's an impossibility for mind to miraculously emerge from something that has no mental property. So this is why empirical science is a faith in the senses. It's a belief in the senses and is not rational, because they prioritize their empirical beliefs and their material beliefs over logic and reason. If they didn't, if they were truly logical and rational, they would see that it is a logical impossibility for mind to somehow emerge from something that has no mental property whatsoever. It's a logical impossibility. And if they were logical and rational, they would understand that, and they would reformulate their paradigm. And they would drop and ditch empiricism. They would drop and ditch materialism for idealism and rationalism. Well, at least for idealism. And if they were rationalists, they would do this. But they're not. They're not rationalists. Life and mind must be essential to existence, or life and mind should not exist at all. It's a simple binary. Since life and mind exist, materialism, the doctrine of inherent lifeless and mindlessness, is disproved. If materialism is disproved, science, which is based on materialism, cannot be true. This is Logic 101. And really, it is, which is why, I say that, sometimes I get very frustrated, because the ideas that we put forth truly aren't radical. At least they shouldn't be, but they are. They're perceived as radical because this world is unable to use logic, is unable to use reason, and is unable to see what is right before them. This whole idea that things behave rationally is not or shouldn't be perceived as radical, but it is. But it is, because this is such a backwards world. And as I said here, this is Logic 101. It should be obvious. Science can perform all the experiments and observations it likes. No experiment or observation can ever contradict logic. You see, if you have an observation that contradicts logic, it means that there's something wrong with your observation. You can observe lots of things that aren't true. To use a really basic analogy, if you go to a magic show, you'll see lots of things, you will perceive lots of things, well, they aren't really true, are they? Now, this is a very loose analogy, but you can see that you have to decide, what are you going to give supremacy to? Are you going to give it to logic and reason, or are you going to give it to your senses? If you see something that contradicts logic and reason, then you know that you're seeing something that is not true. You're having a perception, but a perception is not truth. It's just an experience. And you can have lots of experiences that aren't true. So again, no experiment or observation can ever contradict logic. Fallacious interpretations of experiments and observations, however, can certainly contradict logic, right? So fallacious interpretations of experiments and observations can certainly contradict logic. Science is full of these fallacies. So, one of these that we might mention is Schrodinger's cat being both alive and dead at the same time. The cat wave function being in a superposition of both alive and dead. And it's not until you open the box that it collapses into one of the two properties. So this is something that contradicts reason. You can't have a cat in a state of both living and dead at the same time. The cat is either living or dead. But you see, they don't want to admit that reality is mental. So they cling to these fallacious ideas that contradict logic and reason simply because they don't want to deny their faith in materialism. Schrödinger actually put forward the thought experiment of the cat in the box as an example of how absurd the popular scientific interpretation of quantum mechanics, the Copenhagen interpretation, is. So Schrödinger put forward this thought experiment to show, no, this can't be true. Like, look how crazy, you'll get absurd results. However, you'll never hear that in university. They'll simply teach the Schrödinger cat thought experiment as if it were true, as if it were fact, when it's not. It's merely a flawed and fallacious interpretation that contradicts reason that was originally put forth by Schrödinger to show the absurd results you'll get if you take the Copenhagen interpretation as being true. At the grotesque cadaver trial in 897, the corpse of a dead pope was exhumed and placed on trial at the papal court on the grave charge of usurping. Okay, so yeah, this is a bit about the Pope. In materialism, the whole world is full of corpses, projecting the illusion of life, mind, consciousness, and free will. All of these properties are impossible in a universe which is grounded in nothing but matter. It's about science itself. It's about time science itself was put on trial for its absurd claims about reality. Science is useful for describing any situation where the matter hypothesis is a reasonable heuristic. As it has proved, it is useless in every other circumstance. So science is a useful heuristic. In other words, it can be useful if you're modeling the world as though it were only material. And you can use it to do many things, such as put a person on the moon and create technology. You can do a lot of things with it if you assume that reality is material. But it cannot explain the essence of reality. So it can create technology, it can be descriptive, and it can be a useful model, but it cannot explain anything. It cannot explain life, mind, consciousness. As it has proved, it is useless in every other circumstance. Idealism, and Hyperianism is an idealism. Idealism, and what does idealism mean? Well, remember, idealism references idea, which references the mind, right? Idea, mind, idealism. Idealism means that reality is mental, not physical. Reality is mental. And of course, in Hyperianism, reality is a construct of mathematical frequency patterns, sinusoidal waveforms, all stemming from the source formula. So reality is mind. What is mind? Mathematical frequency. Well, what is matter? Matter is the particular combinations of mathematical frequency that all of us contribute to, which stabilizes, and then we experience as being material. Very similar to how when you go to sleep and dream at night. Idealism, which is all about the mind rather than matter, has consciousness as its ultimate evolutionary product. Not just any consciousness, maximum consciousness, absolute consciousness, God consciousness. This is what we call Abraxian consciousness in Hyperianism. The meaning of idealist existence is for existence to come to complete self-awareness. All right? So, and remember, I highly encourage all of you to understand the three Hyperion modes of thought: avatar, monadic, and Abraxian, because this is all going to be crucial to understand. Yeah, so make sure you familiarize yourself with these three Hyperion modes: Avatar, Monadic, and Abraxian. So, the meaning of idealist existence is for existence to come to complete self-awareness. It comes to self-awareness through us as nodes of Abraxas. As we come to self-consciousness, and as we attain Abraxian consciousness, the universe, reality itself, begins to become self-aware. As we become aware of each other and us as nodes of the universe and nodes of reality, of the cosmic mind, it becomes aware of itself because it is us, through us. We are what it is. God does not create the universe creates God. How does the universe create God? Through us. That's the Abraxian consciousness becoming aware of itself. We are all the nodes of Abraxas, or the nodes of God. We are God. And as we become aware that we're God, God becomes conscious. Abraxas, the Abraxian consciousness. By the way, I don't blame you if you come from a religious background and the word God has a distasteful flavor to you. I relate. I sometimes don't like using the word God. Having that religious background, it has really dirtied it. But remember, we're talking about Abraxian consciousness here. So God does not create the universe creates God, which is us, as coming to know ourselves. That is its purpose. The universe starts off as God unconscious, alpha, and ends up as God conscious, omega. This is achieved via us, the individual cells of God, the eternal and necessary monadic minds that comprise the substance of God. Just always remember, God is not something apart from us. It is us. And I know that I show this diagram so much, but I just want to really always emphasize it because this is so misunderstood. Is that if you view we can view this as Abraxas, the one mind, but notice each and every single one of us is a monad. Each circle is a monad. Each circle is one of us. And so it is all of us. That is what it is. It's not apart from us. It's not separate from us. It is us as a collective. And as each one of these nodes comes online through self-awareness and awareness of itself as Abraxas, Abraxas comes online as it attains self-consciousness through us, as we attain this Abraxian consciousness. Alpha God is the state of maximum mental entropy, total unconsciousness. Omega God is the state of minimal mental entropy, the zero entropy state of perfect consciousness, perfect being. So Alpha God you could think of as Abraxas unconscious, and Omega God as Abraxas 100% conscious and self-aware. Everything is conducted via mathematics, the divine language. Mathematics provides the syntax and semantics, the fabric and fiber of existence. It is the only thing which can. Existence is possible thanks to mathematics exclusively. No mathematics, no existence. The equation could not be starker. The sole ontological truth is existence is mathematics. Existence is mathematics. And once again, as always, what does this mean? This is the equation for existence. This is the source formula. The source formula generates sinusoidal waves. These sinusoidal waves are mathematical frequency patterns. From mathematical frequency patterns, we can combine them to create any wave function, no matter how complex, which gives rise to all reality around us. So to say that reality is mathematical is to say that reality is frequency, is to say that reality is mind. These are all, and is to say that reality is energy. These are all different words for the same concept. Mathematics is mind. Its frequency aspect is, rather, and is energy, and is light as well, but that's, a story for another time. Existence is simply whatever is capable of existing. And only one thing is capable of existing: mathematics. And so basically, what can exist? Only one thing can possibly exist, and that's mathematics. Why is that mathematics? Well, most importantly, because it is the only thing that rationally can exist, because it is reason itself, but also because the only thing that can exist is nothing, and mathematically nothing is equivalent to zero, but we can set zero to equal to an infinity of positive and negative values, which means that zero isn't empty, it's pulsing with life. Because mathematically you can set zero equal to everything. Why can you set zero equal to everything? Because everything is a balance of positive and negative, a balance of opposites. And because you have a balance of opposites, that equals zero. Let me show you once again this important graphic. We saw that reality is made of frequency. Now, if you take one of these frequency waves and integrate it, which means if you take its total result across a full cycle, what is it equal to? It's equal to zero, right? One of these waves, all of these waves, because each one is equal to zero. Zero is equivalent to nothingness. So mathematics is the only thing that can rationally exist, because the only thing that can exist is nothingness, and nothingness is equivalent to zero, and zero is equivalent to everything, because it contains both positive and negative. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I really urge you to see how this explains everything. All the fundamental questions. We have a lot of details we need to tease out, of course, but all the fundamental questions, such as how can existence be possible at all? Science can't explain it. The Big Bang, the cause of the Big Bang, there's no sufficient reason for it. You can't appeal to quantum fluctuations or anything like that, because that is a something. And what is the sufficient reason for these quantum fluctuations and things like that? Religion can't explain it. Who created God? Ontological mathematics. Hyperianism. We can. How is existence possible? Because existence is equal to zero, which is mathematically equivalent to frequency of all possible values, which is everything, and we can construct the universe from it. I really urge you to just reflect on how beautiful and elegant this is, and how it answers everything, and how it shows that we are both nothing and something at the same time. We don't exist the way you think we exist. We exist in this void-like mathematical collective dream. It's very interesting, and this means that it's our playing ground. We created this for ourselves. We created this for ourselves to exist in, and to gain self-knowledge, and to experience. So this is why the world needs to get its shit together, because we have so much that we could be doing. There are so many interesting things that we could be doing and exploring. We could be doing but no, instead people are killing each other, wars, homophobia, sexism, violence, all these terrible things. When really this is our playing ground, and we could be taking advantage of this and doing, but instead we live in a world of suffering. But it doesn't need to be the way that it is. Of course there will always be challenges, but they can be fun, like when you play a game. When you play a game, the challenges are fun. That's what makes the game, that's what makes the game exciting. It doesn't need to be this chaotic mess that we live in right now. I mean, look around you. Look at how horrible this is. So this is why we need this Abraxian consciousness, so that we all realize we're in this together, and then we can start really reaping the fruits of this world that we have. This universe is like a blank canvas, and then we can create whatever we want. We can write any story we want. We can play any game that we want. But we all have to get on the same page here. Existence is simply whatever is capable of existing. Only one thing is capable of existing: mathematics. Mathematics alone has the properties compatible with eternal and necessary existence. And we explained this, right? How it's equal to zero and all that. Anything that cannot exist eternally and necessarily cannot exist at all. That is exactly what the inviolable laws of conservation of energy states. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. That being the case, energy cannot come into existence, and nor can energy go out of existence. So all energy has existed forever. It exists eternally and necessarily. And we are energy. As monads, we are units of energy. It means that we are eternal. What is energy? Energy equals existence equals mathematics. Specifically, energy equals sinusoidal waves, the eternal necessary output of Euler's formula, the master formula for existence. And just as a reminder, put it up on screen. I know I do this a lot, but for anyone who is new, I really always want these fundamentals to be firmly set. So, Euler's formula, the master formula for existence, the eternal necessary outputs. Sinusoids are the necessary outputs of Euler's formula. And here, these are the sinusoids, the cosine and sine waves. These are sinusoids. They are the necessary eternal outputs of reality. You can see this is a circle. A circle is equal to these sinusoidal wave outputs. And of course, across their full cycles, they're equal to 0. So, right, this is why you're looking at something, this is why this is the source formula, the master equation for all of reality. It's equal to sinusoidal waves. And in its entirety here, what you're looking at in its entirety is equal to 0. Across a full cycle, it is equal to 0. So you're looking at a very interesting sort of void construct that produces mind, that produces everything around us. Remember, I used words like produce loosely. It's not like they're coming into existence. They are eternal and have always existed. But it is a necessary consequence, their eternal existence. The formula, here we go. Euler's formula is the God equation. In Hyperianism, we call this the source formula. There is and can be only one such equation. Reality is nothing but the exploration of the consequences of the formula for existence. The formula for existence, think about how exciting this is, guys. We have the formula for all existence. The formula for existence is exactly the same as the formula for life, mind, and thought. They are all the same thing. To exist is to live. To have a mind and to think. Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. As we see in our dreams, thinking can produce outer worlds. When you go to sleep and dream, you produce an outer world. You see how it's both outer and inner at the same time? A dream is both outer and inner. It's outer in that you can go and explore, right? You can walk across a room. Things have extension. There are whole worlds. In that sense, it's outer, right? But it's all contained within your mind, so it's also inner. Really and truly, it's all inner, and the outer is a sort of illusion. Same thing with this objective reality. It's all inner, in that it's in the mind of Abraxas. It's the collective mind. It's our collective thoughts. But it seems like it's outer, when it's not really. Just like a dream seems like it's external and outer, when it's not really. It's all contained within the mind. In the case of the personal dream, it's your personal mind. In the case of the objective world, it's the collective mind. We are all part of a living cosmic organism. All right? We are all part of a living cosmic organism seeking to optimize itself, to perfect itself. The cosmic mind produces a cosmic world, in which mind can contend with its own construct and come to consciousness via all the problems and struggles that it encounters there. We are alienated from the world because we fail to understand that we unconsciously created it. Right? This is the point here, guys. We feel alienated from it because we fail to understand that we unconsciously created it. This is our creation, just like a dream is our creation. It's just a dream is your personal creation. The universe is our collective creation. Only consciousness can reveal the truth, that everything is made by us, that we have total control over it if we put our mind to it. Minds and their thoughts are all that exist. There is nothing else. Come and discover the extraordinary story of how consciousness is born from the unconscious. This is the story of existence. This is the story of the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. The point of life is to know what the point of life is. And you can accomplish that only via the attainment of absolute knowledge, absolute understanding, absolute consciousness, which we call Abraxian consciousness. We are all part of a God factory. Gods are what come off the production line at the end of an eons-long, protracted dialectical process designed to overcome every possible obstacle, trial, setback, difficulty, and ordeal. You need to be a god to survive the dialectic. It takes you to hell and forces you to confront the devil. The devil is you. This is why we're in a hellish world. The devil is your shadow. Only devils can become gods. That is the law of the dialectic. As Nietzsche said, everything good is the transmutation of something evil. Every god has a devil for a father. And everything conscious has the unconscious for a mother. Another quote by Nietzsche. When I was 12 years old, I thought up an odd trinity, namely God the Father, God the Son, God the Devil. My inference was that God, in contemplating himself, created the second person of the Godhead, but that in order to be able to contemplate himself, he had to contemplate and thus to create his opposite. With this, I began to do philosophy. Sentience and consciousness are often conflated. They should be prized apart. Sentience and consciousness are different. Okay, so this is really important, very important to understand this. Sentience is a feature of the unconscious. Taking Jung's four mental faculties of thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition, we can define sentience as encapsulating feeling, sensing, and intuition, with consciousness corresponding to thinking, reasoning. So remember, consciousness goes hand in hand with reasoning. Sentience goes hand in hand with experience. So do you see there's a difference between experience and reasoning? Animals are sentient. They can experience, but not conscious. They can't reason. Humans are sentient and conscious. We can experience and we can reason. To be conscious, to be able to think and reason, requires a conceptual language. Thinking is the manipulation of concepts. To feel, sense, and intuit requires no language. Consciousness is the means by which I'm going to highlight this because this is so important. I'm going to say it again. To be conscious, to be able to think and reason, requires a conceptual language. Thinking is the manipulation of concepts. And this is what we're going to be talking about on Saturday on the video that I'm releasing. There's a New Age guru I'm going to be reacting to who's telling you that you should not think and that concepts take you further away from reality, which is not true. Concepts are a property of consciousness. Anyway, to feel, sense, and intuit requires no language. Consciousness is the means by which mere experience is translated into verbal concepts, which can then be manipulated separately from the original experience. A human can lie in his bed with his eyes closed and have next to no sensory input, yet be consumed by his thoughts, his conceptualizations, his plans. No animal can do this. Consciousness is totally different from sentience. So an animal can go out there and have lots of experiences. It can feel pleasure and pain and hunger. It is sentient. It can even, certain animals can feel emotion. It's sentient. But it is not conscious because it can't reason. So a human being can be laying in bed with its eyes closed and have no sensory input whatsoever, but it can think about, I think tomorrow I'm going to go to the store and maybe I'll do some reading, and then, at 6 o'clock I might take a nap. And an animal can't do this. A human can, because it's conscious and able to manipulate concepts. The more conscious you are, the greater ability you have to manipulate concepts and to apply concepts accurately to reality. Ultimately, we want our conception of reality to match objective reality perfectly. For our subjectivity to match objectivity. This is the unity of subject and object. When our subjectivity matches objectivity, this is the unity of subject and object. This is also called, in certain esoteric circles, the great work. The unity of subject and object, the great work. So consciousness is totally different from sentience. So sentience concerns feeling, sensing, and intuition. It deals with emotion, sensory perception, and extrasensory perception. While consciousness is the faculty of thinking. It deals with reasoning applied to concepts. It is an intelligible Platonist activity. There are two hard problems, explaining how sentience is possible and explaining how consciousness arises. And science, materialist science, can do neither. They cannot explain sentience, nor can they explain consciousness. The very hard problem. Everything is wrong about both science and everything that is wrong about both science and philosophy is encapsulated by philosopher David Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness. He wrote, "The easy problem of consciousness are those that seem directly susceptible to the standard methods of cognitive science, whereby a phenomenon is explained in terms of computational or neural mechanisms. The hard problems are those that seem to resist those methods. The really hard problem of consciousness is the problem of experience. When we think and perceive, there is a whir of information processing, but there is also a subjective aspect. When we see, for example, we experience visual sensations, the felt quality of redness, the experience of dark and light, the quality of depth in a visual field. Other experiences go along with the perception in different modalities. The sound of a clarinet, the smell of mothballs. Then there are bodily sensations, from pains to orgasms, mental images that are conjured up internally, the felt quality of emotion, and the experience of a stream of conscious thought. What Chalmers is actually talking about is the hard problem of sentience, not of consciousness." You see why it's really important to define these terms? Because you're going, and this is David Chalmers is a philosopher. You're going to run into problems if you start talking about things. And this is where the New Age spiritualists are so bad. They talk about consciousness and they have no idea what consciousness is. They try to get you to a higher plane of consciousness by emphasizing not thinking, which is crazy. That is the furthest thing from attaining a higher state of consciousness. Being able to more accurately manipulate concepts via thinking is how we attain higher degrees of consciousness. Not thinking is the opposite of attaining a higher degree of consciousness. It's so bad. It's just so bad and so backwards. All of the truly enlightened systems are all about knowledge. Know thyself. Know thyself and you will know the universe and the gods. And then we have these New Age spiritualist communities that say, oh, it's all about not thinking and not knowing. How is enlightenment about not thinking and not knowing? It's the exact opposite of enlightenment. But guess what? People really like this idea. And that's why they get so many followers. Because people really like the idea that not thinking and not knowing leads to enlightenment. Because not thinking and not knowing is really easy. So what are people going to be attracted to? The fact that, oh, you know, the truth that we are all gods coming to know it ourselves through the attainment of higher knowledge and struggle and experience and learning and growth and most importantly, understanding the conceptual nature of reality, or by not thinking and not knowing. Of course, most people are lazy. So they want to take the path of least resistance. And they're so attracted to this idea of, oh, yes, I'll become super enlightened by not knowing and not thinking. When that leads you away from enlightenment to the unconscious sentience of animals. Right? It leads you to an animalistic perception of reality rather than a enlightened, a higher perception of reality. So anyway, what Chalmers is actually talking about, Chalmers gets this wrong, Chalmers is talking about the hard problem of sentience, not of consciousness. All animals and human babies are sentient, but none is conscious. They have plenty of experiences, feelings, intuitions, and so on, a whole world of empirical content and percepts of various kinds, but all without the benefit of consciousness. Now, sentience is really important. We want to have sentience. Sentience is great. And especially, you know, when you do things like trip on psychedelics, that expands your field of sentience. And that's extremely interesting, right? But it is not expanding your conceptual field. It can be used as a catalyst for contemplating new ideas, which can expand your conceptual field, but it doesn't expand your conceptual field directly. It can be a catalyst for it, but indirectly. You see, it does so indirectly, not directly. Sentience concerns the experience itself, the content, the empirical percept, the feeling, but consciousness concerns reflecting on the experience and establishing its intelligible aspect, the form, the rational concept. This is exactly what animals and human babies cannot do, and regarding what a popular practice such as meditation is useless. And this is where I want to emphasize, see, I'm a big proponent of psychedelics, but I want to show you the difference, that psychedelics expands your field of sentience, not your field of consciousness, but it can be used as a catalyst. Remember I did a video on what would happen if Trump did DMT, and it was basically that, well, it wouldn't help, because he's not at a level of consciousness where it would have any effect. So if an intelligent person trips, their field of sentience will expand, and then they can use their consciousness to reflect on that experience to then form higher ideas. However, if someone is unintelligent, they can have the same experience, but they lack the consciousness to reflect on that experience, so it's pretty useless. So that's why you know, to someone like you, if you're intelligent, you may trip, and you may use your consciousness to reflect on that content to form higher conceptions of reality. But then I'm sure you know people who trip all the time, and they're just like, whoa, that was trippy, man. And they just do it for fun, and they don't get anything out of it, and it's just recreational. It's like watching something on TV. It's because their sentience field is expanding, but they lack the consciousness to reflect on that content to be able to form higher concepts. So that's why it's really important to understand that things like psychedelics are tools, but they're not the answer in themselves. They're tools for people who have the understanding and the level of intelligence and consciousness to be able to reflect on them and use them properly. So hopefully that makes sense, because that's a really important thing to understand, that things like psychedelics and whatnot, they're a tool. They're not the answer themselves. Consciousness is what you get when you separate the concept of the experience from the experience itself. This allows the creation of a conceptual mind space distinct from the perceptual sensorium, the sensory apparatus or sensory faculties considered as a whole, the seat of sensation, where the mind experiences and interprets the external environment, which we shall call the sense space. So the sense space, right, the sensory environment, the sense space relies directly on the world. The mind space does not. You cannot carry the sense space around with you to be studied later. You cannot put it on pause. You can with the mind space. You can put it to one side whenever you like and return to it whenever you like. The mind space is the noosphere, the sphere of thought, which can detach itself from physicality and evolve mentally rather than physically. The sense space is all about perceptions. The mind space is all about concepts. In the sense space, we respond to external objects, percepts. In the mind space, we respond to internal objects, concepts. Percepts are there while we are observing them, and not there when we are not. This is the essence of the philosophy of empiricism. Reality, it says, is about the immediate objects of experience. Everything else is a mere pale echo and afterimage. Rationalism, which is what Hyperianism is about the mind space. The mind space is not the sense space. The mind space, not the sense space, is where we reflect on the past and anticipate the future. It is the non-meditative, non-physical aspect of judgment, of conceptualization, where we manipulate concepts from memories of the past and projections into the future. It is where our I, our ego, our agent of action exists and operates, where it spins its continuous narrative concerning our life, where we are always at the center of our world. The I can exist only in the mind space. It can never be in the sense space. No animal is an I, and no human baby is. They haven't developed that sense of awareness yet. They haven't developed the conscious ego. All unconscious creatures lack a mind space. They lack the capacity to conceptualize. Right? An animal and a baby, they don't conceptualize consciously. They don't think, oh man, I'm really hungry right now, so, I think that maybe... No, they don't think that. An animal goes out and eats, a baby cries. They don't reflect on the past or plan for the future in any sort of reflective way. The unconscious is where we perceive and react instinctively to what we perceive. The conscious is where we conceive and plan. The mind space is a mental space that firstly allows us to reflect on the sense space, and secondly to start reflecting on itself. Now, most humans today, they'll reflect on the sense space, they'll reflect on their physical environment, but rarely do they reflect on thought itself. They don't reflect on thinking about thinking. And this is why people get trapped in limiting reality tunnels, because they don't even realize that they are in a reality tunnel, which is a constellation of concepts. A reality tunnel is a constellation of concepts, and there's nothing wrong with a reality tunnel, but you don't want to be trapped in a limiting one. You want to be not trapped, but you want to be within a constantly evolving reality tunnel that is self-reflective and aware of itself and constantly dialectically updating itself to match objective reality more and more. This is what it means to raise your consciousness. You exist within a constellation of concepts, and to reach a higher state of consciousness is to be able to reflect on your own concepts, thinking about thought, and to be self-updating so that your conceptual field of existence matches what existence actually is objectively. And what is existence actually objectively? It's a mathematical frequency environment. It is a system of mathematical frequency. And we are all nodes of the cosmic mind. And so for us to all obtain, right, stepping into an Abraxian consciousness is a conceptual raising of an awareness. We can also have the experience of it as well. I mean, that's great, and we want that. But to be able to step into it fully, the philosopher Hegel understood this. It requires reason, and reason is concept. It requires a conceptual updating. And that's what humanity needs to do to get on the same page. All our reality tunnels need to stop conflicting with one another and have a common thread running through them, a common concept that we are both one and many, the avatar, monadic, and Abraxian perspectives, that we are all one, that we're all many at the same time, but we're all nodes of a cosmic mind, and we're in this together. You see how it's an updating of a conceptual field to more accurately reflect objective reality. The mind space is a mental space that first allows us to reflect on the sense space, and second, to start reflecting on itself. Consciousness is impossible without a mind space that you can contemplate. Sentience is impossible without a sense space you can experience. Machines have neither. They can't contemplate and they can't experience. They simply execute programmed algorithms. When the computer system Watson won the quiz show Jeopardy, it had no idea that it had won, and no experience of playing and winning. It didn't feel any stress during the game, no excitement as the tension built, no interest at any point, and it took no satisfaction from the event. Its human creators got all the fun. Human consciousness is initially born from the human mind's response to the sense space. Sense space is important. But it can then evolve in its own way and become totally independent. We can live as pure conscious minds, wholly separate from the physical world of the senses. We can still have externality, but externality would now consist of mental entities that surround our personal conceptual space. What mentally contains us? The collection of all monadic minds, which manifests itself to us as the collective unconscious. It also offers the possibility of direct mental interaction with other minds via telepathy. Absolute cosmic consciousness, God, precedes the sensory universe. A perfect mind space is all that originally exists, the perfect source. This is the singularity, the source singularity, prior to the Big Bang. This is a living version of Plato's immaterial domain of forms outside space and time, a strictly conceptual, non-physical domain. It is God as a collective being, a collective mind made up of individual living cells, monadic minds, of which each of us is one. Remember that Abraxian perspective. We are and always have been units of God. Units of Abraxas. God is defined through us. He is not separate from us. He is not our creator. He is our creation, that which is created out of us. The Big Bang is an involution event, signifying a transition from a higher state to a lower state. God splinters from a conscious unity into an unconscious plurality of countless individual cells. Monads. This is the fall. It was not man that fell, it was God. The God mirror split into myriad shards, and now they all have to be fitted together again so that God can once again see himself reflected and know exactly who he is. The evolution of the cosmos is designed to achieve exactly this. At the Big Bang, God totally loses consciousness. We might even say that God dies. It then has to resurrect itself, which equates to completely restoring consciousness. And that's what we're doing through us by stepping into an Abraxian awareness. On Earth, we are the avatars of Abraxas. This is us. This is who we are right here, right now, in the Hyperion community. We are the avatars of Abraxas. We are God on Earth. We have to qualify this by pointing out that God has two modes, being and becoming. The first is eternal and necessary. It never changes. It is Parmenidean. So Parmenides was a pre-Socratic philosopher who said that all change was an illusion and that reality is ultimately one changeless thing. The second is temporal and contingent. It always changes. It is Heraclitean or Heraclitean. Heraclitus was another Greek philosopher who said that all reality is eternally changing. Another pre-Socratic Greek philosopher who said that all reality is eternally changing. He said that it was like fire, always changing. So, the first is eternal and necessary, it never changes, it is Parmenidean. The second is temporal and contingent, it always changes, it is Heraclitean. The cosmos of becoming is where our human consciousness is located. And it is in this cosmos that a dialectical process is underway to convert the unconscious into the conscious. The cosmic mind creates a collective perceptual space, the physical world, and then, as the individual minds that make up the cosmic mind try to grasp what this strange alien world is, in which they are totally estranged, they slowly and steadily create language and concepts and thereby become conscious. Unfortunately, they are falsely conscious because they are using inverted man-made language and concepts. I'm going to highlight that because that's really important. Right? They start to become conscious because they use language and concepts, but this is a kind of false consciousness. It's a false reality tunnel. Because remember, a reality tunnel is a constellation of concepts, a conceptual field. But if your conceptual field is using invented man-made language and concepts, it's a false reality tunnel. When they become sufficiently intelligent, sufficiently conscious, then they grasp that reality has its own language, its own concepts. To understand reality, they must align themselves with nature's inbuilt language, not their own artificial man-made languages, which necessarily falsify reality and anthropomorphize it, give it a human shape. Ontological mathematics is the inherent language of existence, and it is when we align our consciousness with natural numbers rather than unnatural man-made words that we become true minds that see the truth of reality and also acquire total power over reality, mind over matter. Another way to imagine this is imagine that reality were a video game, but that you didn't know it was a video game. So, as you start to gain consciousness in that video game world, guess what you would do? You would say, oh, that is a tree, that is a plant, that is a squirrel. And you start applying, man-made concepts to that reality. But they ultimately are false concepts. What's the true concept? It's the code. The code. That isn't really a tree. That isn't really a squirrel. It's a complex of code. It's a certain code pattern. So when humans become sufficiently intelligent, they realize that things aren't trees and squirrels and plants and animals. They're all different forms of code. Right? Thinking about that video game metaphor. A sufficiently conscious human in that video game world would realize that, oh, it's not the video game tree that it is true, it's the code that is true. I'm just having an experience of a tree, and I applied the concept of tree to it. Really, I should apply the code structure to it to know what it truly is, because it truly is a code structure. Likewise, in reality, applying man-made languages to things is false. It's a step up. We're getting there, right? It's a more evolved reality tunnel, but it's not accurate because things aren't really trees and cups and squirrels and what have you. They are mathematical frequency. They grasp that reality has its own language, its own concepts. To understand reality, they must align themselves with nature's inbuilt language, not their own artificial, man-made languages, which necessarily falsify reality and anthropomorphize it, give it a human shape. Ontological mathematics is the inherent language of existence. And it is when we align our consciousness with natural numbers rather than unnatural man-made words that we become true minds that see the truth of reality and also acquire total power over reality. Mind over matter. Words falsify reality. They are false concepts. Numbers reflect reality. They are true concepts. And if that ever confuses you, by saying that, remember that numbers in mathematics is frequency. It's frequency. Humanity has suffered from two radical problems. One, the empiricists have become obsessed with the sense space and dismissed the mind space as an illusion. And two, the believers have worshipped man-made concepts, such as anthropomorphic gods. Empiricism and faith are the twin enemies of reason. Followers of Eastern religion have dismissed the sense space of percepts as illusory, but equally dismissed the mind space of concepts as illusory. They deny that the material world really exists, but they also deny that concepts reflect reality. Hence, what they seek is to be absorbed by bare consciousness, which they conceive as some blissful, non-judgmental, enlightened state of mind, free from pain and suffering, nirvana, moksha, heaven. They have, of course, fatally contradicted themselves, since this idea is just another man-made concept. Followers of Eastern religion emphasize intuitive visions, while followers of Western religion emphasize emotional beliefs. Scientists focus on the sense space and reject the conceptual space. Philosophers dwell on the man-made conceptual space and largely ignore the sense space. Ontological mathematicians, the true thinkers, are those who grasp that reality is all about the eternal necessary conceptual language of mathematics, from which everything else is derived. Only ontological mathematics is true. It is thinking conceptual truth. Everything else is perceptual, emotional, intuitive, or man-made, and is invariably false. You cannot state any truth that is not conceptual, intelligible, and based on form and essence, reason and logic, on pure thoughts. Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle understood this thousands of years ago. Modern humanity, under the spell of empiricism, has gone backwards. Carl Jung wrote, "Individuation is not that you become an ego, you would then become an individualist. You know, an individualist is a man who did not succeed in individuating. He is a philosophically distilled egotist. You see, as the individual is not just a single separate being, but by his very existence presupposes a collective relationship. It follows that the process of individuation must lead to more intense relationships and not to isolation." Individuation, by the way, is the Jungian concept of what we call interstar actualization. And we talked about this in our last live stream about why you feel like you don't fit in. It leads to more intense relationships and not to isolation. And that's really hard for us because we can be very isolated because we feel like we don't fit into this world. That's why the Hyperion community is so important, because we need those relationships and we need that community. But we need a positive one, not a negative one that the world offers. Individuation and individual existence are indispensable for the transformation of God. Human consciousness is the only seeing eye of the deity. I'm going to say that again. Human consciousness is the only seeing eye of the deity. That's why when we awaken to what we are, it's Abraxas becoming awakened. Because our consciousness is the only seeing eye of the deity. It sees itself through us. We are it. That's why we say we are the opening of the great eye. That's why you see in esoteric symbolism the great eye. That's what the great eye is. We are the awakening of the great eye. Thus, the devil is a preliminary stage of individuation. In the negative, it has the same goal as the divine quaternity, namely wholeness. Although it is still in darkness, it already carries the germ of light within itself. Individuation does not isolate, it connects. We are the unapologetic champions of mathematics, the supreme thinking conceptual subject, the subject of reason and logic. Yet things are more complicated than simply turning to mathematics for everything. There are 4 Jungian mental functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. To become fully individuated, and what does it mean to be fully individuated? It's about making the unconscious conscious. It's everything about interstar actualization. We need a separate language for each of them in order that each can be optimally expressed, whilst bearing in mind that mathematics is the language, the foundational language. If we regard mathematics as pure logos, the language of thinking, the relevant language for feeling is mythos, the language of emotional and emotive stories and characters. Abrahamism is based on a mythos concerning the highest possible stakes, heaven and hell, salvation and damnation. That's why it's so popular and persuasive. Logos, mathematics, is the language of analytic numbers. Mythos is the language of emotional words. Humanity's mistake is that it has made religious mythos For emotionalists and religious mysticism for intuitives, the highest languages for expressing the thoughts and beliefs of ordinary people. And science, for sensing types, the highest language for expressing intelligence. Philosophy has typically been used as the language for thinking types, but it has been destroyed by science. The language that has been deemed least relevant to reality is none other than the one that actually defines reality, ontological mathematics. Humanity will become divine only when it puts ontological mathematics first and realizes that everything else is just a degraded version of mathematics. What is the problem with science? It operates exclusively with regard to the sense space and sees mathematics as abstract conceptualism. It believes that undefinable matter is the empirical syntax, framework of reality. In fact, matter is pure mathematics. Matter is made of sinusoidal waves, as quantum mechanics more or less explicitly reveals. Science's method addresses the observable sense space, hence science cannot cope with reason and logic, with conceptual intelligibility, with rationalism. Science's central failing is its inability to address the mind space. What is the problem with meditation? It seeks to reduce both the sense space and mind space to zero, leaving nothing but nothingness, which is imagined to be an enlightened state of nirvana. Pure mind, pure consciousness, pure acceptance, pure bliss. What is the problem with prayer? It seeks to make man-made concepts of perfection, God, the highest good, in need of worship and glorification. This establishes a master-slave mentality, whereby we are all seen as created beings that must do everything to please our Creator or be annihilated or horrifically punished by Him for being so imperfect. Science is all about the sense space. It dismisses the mind space. Eastern religion dismisses both the sense space and mind space and concentrates on nothingness, supposedly bare consciousness. Abrahamism accepts the sense space as the creation of God and focuses on the mind space conception of God as the highest reality. Ontological mathematics derives everything, including the sense space, from the conceptual, numerical mind space. This is a mental reality. Everything is about how the sense space and mind space and their mutual relationship is handled. Reality is made of concepts we can grasp through reason and logic. It is not made of mysterious matter that we can observe in some way but can never know. Only mathematical concepts are definable and intelligible. Everything else is undefinable and unintelligible. Everything else is mere description and never explanation. Mathematics alone is a system of intelligible ontology, epistemology, and explanation. Concepts are the matter of systematic knowledge. We must replace unintelligible matter, perceptual matter available to the senses, with intelligible matter, conceptual matter available to reason and logic. The reification, the concreteness, the ontology of concepts, yielding ontological mathematics, is the hardest of all ideas for people to grasp. Only the finest minds can embrace it. German idealism is much closer with the truth than science will ever be. The sole flaw with idealism was that, unlike science, it could not embrace mathematics, the supreme conceptual subject. Ontological mathematics, allied to the work of Leibniz, Kant, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Hartmann, and Jung, is the wholesale replacement for science and will totally transform the human psyche and default worldview. It will also allow serious philosophy, grand philosophy, to be reborn and once again rule over science. Every philosopher ought to join this great crusade in their own interests. Mathematics is the subject of eternal and necessary rational noumenal concepts granting us immortality. Science is the derivative subject of temporal, contingent, empirical, and phenomenal matter, granting us mortal avatars, bodies. Minds are our vehicles for eternity. Bodies are our vehicles for temporality. There is only bodily death, never mental death. Consciousness is a big picture tool and ultimately wants to arrive at one idea that explains everything. As Leibniz said, the answer to existence should be the simplest in hypothesis and the richest in phenomena. Perception is in all the details. Perception is in all the details tool and ultimately wants to perceive the whole universe at once, an impossibility. Concepts and percepts work in opposite directions. Concepts seem to shrink all complexity down to one simple idea. Percepts seek to expand all complexity into an infinity of separate percepts. Concepts are linked to top-down systems and percepts to bottom-up systems. As ever, they are directly opposed. Now, let me explain what this means real quick. What does it mean when Leibniz says the answer to existence should be the simplest in hypothesis and the richest in phenomena? What does that mean? The simplest in hypothesis, the richest in phenomena. Well, if you say, let's take a look at the source formula. So looking at the source formula, this is basically saying this is the simplest in hypothesis. It's very simple. It's one single master formula. But, the simplest in hypothesis, but the richest in phenomena. What does that mean? Well, from this very simple idea, sinusoidal wave, we can combine sinusoidal waves to construct all of existence around us. Extremely rich, extremely complex. Think of all the experiences you can have, all the different sensations, all the different everything. It's extremely rich. But all of it is reducible to simple sinusoidal waves. You see how it's simple in hypothesis, but rich in phenomena. Sinusoidal waves, that's the answer, gives rise to all the richness of the phenomena that we experience. All the rich percepts that we experience hang on this simple concept, this one simple concept. From this one simple concept comes all the rich phenomena that we experience. So I just wanted to point on that. Hopefully that makes sense. Huxley wrote, "To formulate and express the contents of this reduced awareness, man has invented and endlessly elaborated those symbol systems and implicit philosophies which we call languages. These languages are the medium of human consciousness. Without them, we would not be conscious, but might have an enormously expanded perceptual space in exchange. Would you swap?" Huxley wrote, "Every individual is at once the beneficiary and victim of the linguistic tradition into which he or she has been born. The beneficiary, inasmuch as language gives access to his accumulated records of other people's experience. The victim, insofar as it confirms him in the belief that reduced awareness is the only awareness and as it bedevils his sense of reality, so that he is all too apt to take his concepts for data, his words for actual things. This is the classic Eastern and New Age critique of concepts, claiming that they are abstract and unreal, while percepts are claimed to be concrete and real. In fact, mathematical concepts are the true reality. The sinusoid, what we just looked at in that image, the sinusoid is a mathematical concept. The whole of existence, with no exceptions, is made from sinusoids, thus exactly satisfying the simple answer to existence that Leibniz sought, the simplest in hypothesis, the simplest concept, giving rise to the most rich and complex phenomena, experiences. One concept explains everything. The principle of sufficient reason explains everything because it is mathematically translatable into Euler's formula, the source formula. From the source formula, we get all sinusoids, and from all sinusoids, we get the whole of existence. So the reducing valve is applied to the sense space and cuts down the data to a manageable level. The proper way to expand the mind is in fact conceptually, via the mind space. Intellectuals are infinitely more conscious than stupid people and have much vaster minds in comparison. Intelligence is the mind expander, while drugs are a perception expander. Drugs are for perceiving types. Books are for judging types. Trip, meditate, or study, which shall it be? And once again, I want to say that I am a proponent of psychedelics. Again, don't do anything illegal. I am a proponent of psychedelics, but it has to be emphasized that psychedelics expand your perceptual space, not your conceptual space. If you are an intelligent person, you can use your mind to reflect on the perceptual experience, to form new concepts, but this depends on you being an entity, having that ability to form those concepts in the first place. A clear distinction has to be drawn between the sense space and the mind space. You don't expand consciousness by simply expanding the sense space. That simply expands your sensory capacity. Consciousness is a judging function, not a perceiving function. It's extraordinary how many people get this wrong and imagine that consciousness is about perception. All animals perceive. Only humans conceive. Only humans are conscious. Only humans use language and conscious reasoning. Consciousness operates on two things. On the sense space, it makes sense of what we perceive, and two, on itself, on the mind space, on the concepts it has created or discovered. Consciousness is always a reflective process, acting on something else. It is totally wrong to confuse sentience and consciousness. Sentience involves a direct interaction with the world and has no requirement of consciousness. All animals are sentient. Consciousness, by contrast, is a secondary, higher level that reflects on that direct experience and rationalizes it, conceptualizes it. Consciousness entails indirectness. Consciousness converts sensory things into conceptual things. So, for example, we can look at a flower and see its sensory properties. Any animal can do that as well, but only a human processes the concept of flower. A rabbit does not see the world in terms of concepts. It simply perceives the world. It doesn't conceive it. It doesn't convert the world, translate it into concepts. Consciousness is this process of superimposing language over a perceptual substrate, of converting sensory observables into concepts that we can then manipulate and ponder entirely separate from sense experience. Perception is not knowledge. Perception provides raw material to which we can apply concepts. Concepts are knowledge. Empiricism is about perception and experience, not about knowledge. Rationalism is about concepts. Pure rationalism, pure conceptualism is mathematics. The only thing that gets manipulated are mathematical objects, mathematical concepts, numbers, and the shapes and functions that number sequences generate. You cannot have knowledge without concepts, without language. Percepts are not knowledge. They are a raw material that we can translate into knowledge, concepts. Animals do not have any knowledge. They operate entirely instinctively. They suffer from no shortage of perceptual capacity, but a total absence of conceptual capacity. Hegel described the most primitive form of consciousness as sense certainty, certainty at the level of sense experience. This form of consciousness does only one thing. It grasps whatever is in front of it at a given moment. You open your eyes and see the world. Sense certainty is about nothing except recording the data received by our senses at that instant. Hegel said that there is knowledge without concepts and knowledge with concepts. There is primitive consciousness and advanced consciousness. Today, however, we would say it is better not to regard mere perception as indicative of consciousness at all. Tellingly, psychologist Julian Jaynes wrote, "Consciousness is sometimes confused even with simple sense perception. Historically, we inferred and abstracted ideas of sense perception from a realization of our sense organs, and then, because of prior assumptions about mind and matter or soul and body, we believed these processes to be due to consciousness, which they are not. This is a crucial consideration. Humanity's truths do not derive from the facts, but from the interpretation of the facts. The validity of the interpretive framework is therefore always at issue. A long-standing interpretation of consciousness conflates it with sentience. It is exactly this connection that must be broken in order to make progress in understanding both sentience and consciousness." Jaynes continued, "If any of you still think that consciousness is a necessary part of sense perception, then I think you are forced to follow a path to a reductio ad absurdum. You would then have to say that since all animals have sense perception, all are conscious, and so on back through the evolutionary tree, even to one-celled protozoa, because they react to external stimuli, or one-celled plants like the algae, whose visual systems are analogous to ours, and thence to even amoeboid white cells of the blood, since they sense bacteria and devour them. They too would be conscious. And to say that there are 10,000 conscious beings per cubic millimeter of blood whirling around in the roller coaster of the vascular system in each of us here this afternoon is a position few would wish to defend." Okay, so the task is to show that animals are not conscious while humans are conscious, not to show that one-celled plants are conscious. So here's the thing. Plants, animals, I just want to emphasize this so it's not to be confusing, because there's a lot of different viewpoints putting forth here. Plants and animals are sentient. They can have experiences, but they're not conscious. They can't form concepts. They can't form languages. They can't reflect. Julian Jaynes said that consciousness is in everything we do is an illusion. Suppose you asked a flashlight in a completely dark room to turn itself on and to look around and see if there was any light. The flashlight, as it looked around, would of course see light everywhere and come to the conclusion that the room was brilliantly lit, when in fact it was mostly just the opposite. So with consciousness, we have an illusion that it is all mentality. If you look back into the struggles with this problem in the 19th century and early 20th century, this is indeed the error that trapped people into so much of the difficulty and still does. Consciousness is the flashlight. All it ever sees is the light of consciousness, yet it is everywhere surrounded by the dark room of the unconscious. So what does this mean? It means that you are conscious, and since you are conscious, you are like a flashlight. So let's say that a flashlight is in a dark room, and you tell the and the flashlight is looking around. Well, the flashlight would see everything as light, because the flashlight is light. So to the flashlight, it would look like the room was brilliantly lit up from the perspective of the flashlight, when really it's in a dark room. So same thing with your consciousness and the unconscious, right? You as consciousness are like a flashlight. Everything, you are consciousness, you are the flashlight, and your unconscious is the dark room. Any number of unconscious processes feed into consciousness and then need to be interpreted and rationalized by consciousness in terms of a big picture, in an executive summary on which we can reach our decisions. Jaynes wrote, "Second, consciousness does not copy experience. This further error about consciousness stems from the beginning of empiricism, when Locke spoke of the mind's white paper void of all characters without any ideas, on which experience is copied. Had the camera been around at that time, I suggest Locke would have used it instead of a blank paper as his foundational metaphor. In experience, we take successive pictures of the world, immerse them in the developer of reflection, and watch concepts, memories, and all our mental furnishings come into existence." Jaynes is one of the best commentators on the true nature of consciousness. The analog camera, stocked up with blank film, waiting to be populated with content and requiring subsequent treatment by a chemical developer, is a much better metaphor for empiricism than Locke's idea of the mind as a mere blank slate, waiting to have experiences impressed upon it. Why? Because the technology of the camera and the development process has to be explained, and that cannot be done via the pictures taken by the camera. Locke's blank slate, by contrast, has no technology, hence can be glossed over. That said, Locke should have been forced to explain what the blank slate actually was ontologically, and how it could perceive sensory impressions. His explanation could not have relied empiricist arguments, since the slate precedes experiences. It must exist first in order for experiences to be writable on it. A digital camera that we can link to a smartphone or computer or the internet is even better than the analog camera for exposing the inadequacy of Locke's blank slate empiricism. Taking pictures, analogous to having experiences, presupposes a highly sophisticated operating system, programming language, and technology, all of which are required in order to have any experiences at all, thus refuting empiricism as the source of knowledge. Imagine a camera taking one picture after another. There is no knowledge at the end, just a vast collection of pictures. Something needs to come along and interpret the pictures, label the pictures, organize the pictures, apply reason and logic to the pictures, apply concepts to the pictures, then use the knowledge acquired to decide what the pictures mean and what pictures should be taken next. Specific pictures serving a purpose as opposed to random or arbitrary pictures serving no purpose at all. This is consciousness. Animals do not possess it. They are cameras without knowledge, without concepts. Okay, so basically what this is saying is, imagine having simply perceptions. Just perceptions is like a camera taking a bunch of pictures. You're going to have a lot of photographs, right? Pictures, 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 pictures. You have all these pictures strewn about. And they're all perceptions, right? A lot of content. But that's not knowledge. Knowledge is about then being able to take those pictures, organize them into a certain pattern, extract information, apply labels. Do you see the difference? So And, this goes back to our talking about psychedelics and things like this. Someone that doesn't have a conceptual capacity is like the camera that just takes pictures, 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 pictures. Someone that's having a psychedelic experience without conceptual capacity is just having that perception. And they're just like, whoa, that was trippy, man. That was fun. However, someone that does have a conceptual capacity can label it, order it, conceptualize it, structure it, extract information from it, use it. You see the big difference? You have to work on having a very strong conceptual apparatus. You have to work on raising your ability to manipulate concepts. This is why you can, have you ever had a discussion with someone and they just can't listen? It's like they can't listen to reason. They just go, oh, but this, oh, but the Bible says this, or, oh, but, it's because they're not able to use that conceptual field, and why it can seem like you're talking to a wall. Okay. Philosopher Peter Singer said of Hegel's notion of sense certainty. So sense certainty is just taking in, according to Hegel's philosophy, sense certainty is the lowest form of consciousness. In our terms, we wouldn't call this consciousness at all. We would say it's unconscious, because it's pure sentience. It's just, if you see a tree, it's just taking it in. Not forming any concepts, nothing at all, but just taking in the data. Sense certainty, just taking in the data, makes no attempt to order or classify the raw information obtained by the senses. Thus, when this form of consciousness, we wouldn't call it consciousness, but this person does. When this form of consciousness has in front of it what we would describe as a ripe tomato, it cannot describe its experience as a tomato, for that would be to classify what it sees. It cannot even describe the experience as one of seeing something round and red, for these terms too presuppose some form of classification. Sense certainty is aware only of what is not present to it. As Hegel puts it, it is the certainty of the this or the here and now. Buddhists are those that, bizarrely, see the process of classifying things, applying judgment, conceptualization to them, as some sort of artificial process that falsifies what is being observed, as opposed to turning it into useful knowledge. Alan Watts says, what we have forgotten is that thoughts and words are conventions, and that it is fatal to take conventions too seriously. A convention is a social convenience, as, for example, money, but it is absurd to take money too seriously, to confuse it with real wealth, in somewhat the same way thoughts, ideas, and words are coins for real things. Watts is saying that sense certainty is reality, and anything applied to it is therefore a falsification of reality. Yet sense certainty is totally devoid of any knowledge, any interpretation, and any conceptualization. I just want to say real quick here that I actually like Alan Watts. I think Alan Watts is a really interesting individual, and I like some things that he has to say. But here, as you can see, you have to be very, very careful, because he does get lots of things wrong. So this perception furnishes the world animals live in, from which evolution has thankfully allowed us to escape. Watts wants to go right back there, to devolve. To lay claim to some kind of authenticity regarding direct experience, unmediated by language, conceptualism, and the mind space, followers of Eastern religion and New Ageism all basically preach the message of reverse evolution, of going back to the state of animals. Animals never falsify direct experience because they're incapable of doing so. The meditators claim they are reaching pure consciousness or bare consciousness. In fact, they are eradicating consciousness, or reaching the most primitive and useless expression of consciousness. that is Hegelian sense certainty, where you simply acknowledge the existence of the world, but have absolutely no conception, knowledge, and understanding of what existence is, of what you are experiencing. They are committing the classic error of conflating sentience and consciousness. Sense certainty involves sentience. Consciousness is precisely what is absent from sense certainty. Consciousness is what we use to interpret and classify sense certainty, and in turn, and to turn it into useful concepts. Eastern mysticism and New Ageism constitute the pure system of ignorance, of hatred of knowledge and evolution. They reflect a death urge, a longing to return to a state of nothingness, complete unconsciousness, with no knowledge at all of reality. Nirvana was the first instance of the Big Bang, when consciousness was eliminated from the universe, when God died. The unconscious mind might be called the lowest level of consciousness, primordial, bare consciousness. But why call it consciousness at all? It is the default mind, the mind with consciousness, the mind of pure sense certainty and nothing else. It does not know, understand, reflect, anticipate, or remember. Who in their right mind sees that as some great state to be attained? So the really important thing to understand and take away from this is that we don't want to drop to a state of unconsciousness. We want to expand our consciousness by making the unconscious conscious. Do you see the huge difference? And that's what void states are about. People were asking about void states today. Void states, the goal of them is to make the unconscious conscious. So do you see there is a big difference between dropping to an unconscious state and wanting to stay and be unconscious compared to our goal of making the unconscious conscious? You see the really big difference, and it's important to understand this as we step into a new world and a new age, to realize these differences, because you're going to have a lot of new age groups and spiritualists and whatnot kind of trying to trap you and trick you, because some of these ideas can seem really similar, but they're actually opposite. Do you see how, reaching an unconscious state versus making the unconscious conscious, they seem really similar, and so they can trick you and get you to go to the idea of becoming unconscious, which is away from consciousness, whereas the true idea is about making the unconscious conscious. You see why it's so important to update your conceptual field so you can be aware of this and be able to find these flaws and find these errors. So basically, here's the thing. Pure sense certainty, just taking in visual data, that is not truth. That's just perception. Okay, what about applying words to things, concepts to things? Like, okay, I see a tree. What about, okay, first the idea of the tree. Let me show you, let me break this down into 3 stages, because this is so important. Here where we can really put all this in a nutshell. To break it down really simply, first idea is sense certainty. That's just pure perception. If there's a tree in front of you, you haven't applied any concepts to it. It's just the experience of it, the pure raw data of the tree being filtered through your senses. That's sense certainty. That is pure conceptualization, or not conceptualization, pure perception. A lot of New Agers, a lot of spiritualists are going to say that that's truth. That's not truth. Okay? That's not truth. That's the level of animals. Okay, so what's the next stage? Okay, that's applying concepts to it. So now, let's say I apply a concept to it. Oh, that's a tree. It has bark. It is composed of this structure. Now, we are conscious because we are applying a concept to it. Now, is that true? Well, no, it's not, because it's a man-made concept. Is that thing really a tree? No, that's a man-made concept. We're higher. We've become conscious now. We're not just purely in sense certainty. We're more conscious now because we're using concepts, but it's still not truth. That thing in front of you is not actually a tree. We're raised in consciousness, but still not truth. So what's the highest form of consciousness? What is truth? What is that tree really? It is a mathematical wave structure. It's not a tree, and it's not just the sense of it. It is a structure of frequency. It is a wave structure. So by raising our conceptual ability past man-made language to the mathematical language of existence, now our conception of reality matches objective reality. Because we know that it is a wave structure. And when we can fully and totally grasp what that wave structure is, our idea of reality matches what reality actually and truly is. So do you see these three simplistic levels? Sense certainty, just pure perception, not truth. New Agers and spiritualists will try and tell you it's truth. No, that's the animalistic level. Then we get man-made concepts. Is that truth? No, but now we have consciousness because we're operating in the mind space now, the conceptual space. But it's still not truth, but it's a higher level of we have become conscious. Then finally, ontological mathematics, mathematical concepts of reality that completely and totally reflect the wave structure, the wave nature, the mathematical frequency of existence. So New Agers will say that sense certainty is true and concepts are false, right? So they'll say man-made concepts are false, therefore we should have this sense perception is a higher truth. No, that's not true. They're right that man-made concepts are false, but they're wrong that means that we need that sense perception is a higher truth. No, you see how they're going back down? No. You need to go up. We have concepts, but we need higher concepts. We don't need to drop down and get rid of concepts. We need to go up and get better concepts until they 100% reflect reality. So do you see this really big difference and why this is so critical and so important right now for people who are trying to step into a new level of consciousness but are being pulled away by the trap of New Ageism and the trap of many spiritual gurus to say that, oh no, man-made concepts, those are false. What's really true is sense perception. That's the deeper truth. No, you see they're going down. What is true, sense perception is not a deeper knowledge. We have become conscious because of these concepts, but they're not true yet. We need to go higher, not lower, as spiritualists and New Agers will have you do. Not lower, higher, until our concepts 100% reflect the mathematical nature of reality. We want to evolve, not devolve. You see the huge difference. And it can be subtle, right? Do you see why some people will be tricked? It's a subtle difference, but they are worlds apart. And in understanding them, will decide whether you raise your consciousness or lower your consciousness while you evolve or devolve. So incredibly important to understand. So this video is incredibly important, and I urge anyone who's getting sort of distracted by New Ageism and whatnot to definitely consider this sort of thing. I'm probably, after this video is probably going to, I'll probably have people reference this to really understand why New Ageism and spiritual gurus are trapping you and limiting your consciousness. So, extremely important to understand this, the difference between consciousness and sentience, and how raising your level of consciousness is all about gaining higher and higher degrees of concepts, not going down, always going up, always going higher.